Good evening, live from this news center of the Sultanate of Oman television. Here we present to you tonight's news bulletin. But first, the headlines. The Minister of Interior announces the enrolling of applications for the municipal council elections that will be open tomorrow, Sunday. The Sultanate participates in the works of the 4th World Conference of the World Tourism Organization and UNESCO in Kyoto City in Japan. And more than 1.6 billion Omani Riyals is the total volume of direct foreign investments in the Sultanate at the end of the second quarter of 2019. Thank you for joining us. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail. The Minister of Interior announced that the enrolling of applications for the municipal council elections will open from tomorrow, Sunday, the 15th of December 2019. The ministry urges those citizens who did not activate their election record to submit their application through the election website. The Sultanate participated in the works of 4th World Conference of the World Tourism Organization and UNESCO in Kyoto City in Japan. The event was organized under the theme Tourism and Culture. It dealt with horizons of cultural tourism and opportunity. It shed light on the heritage of peoples and nations. It discussed investments in upcoming generations and empower local communities to participate actively in the management of tourism presently and in the future. The Sultanate's delegation to the conference was chaired by His Excellency Ahmed bin Nasser al-Mhirzi, Minister of Tourism. The Sultanate is taking part in the 9th Doha Forum in Qatar under the theme Governance in Multipolar World. The forum, which will continue till the 16th of current month, discusses a number of international issues such as latest global trends, technology, trade, cyber, space governance, international organization and civil society. The Sultanate's delegation is chaired by His Excellency Sayyid Badr bin Hamad bin Hamoud Al Busaidi, Secretary General of the Foreign Ministry. More than 1.6 billion Omani Riyals is the total volume of direct foreign investments in the Sultanate at the end of the second quarter of 2019, with an increase of 13.3% compared to the same corresponding period last year. The foreign investments flows amounted to more than 1.3 billion Riyals according to the National Statistics and Information Center. The United Kingdom came first in the volume of direct foreign investments, followed by the United Arab Emirates. The total balance of credit granted by the commercial banks, Islamic banking institutions and other depository companies increased by 3.9% on an annual basis to reach 25.9 billion Omani Riyals at the end of the last October. The Central Bank of Oman indicated that the credit granted for private sector has grown by 3.4% to reach 23.8 billion Omani Riyals. The Sultanate's total exports of crude oil and condensate oil exceeded 252,918,000 barrels by the end of last October, with an increase of 2.6% compared to the same period last year. The statistics showed that the Sultanate production of crude oil and condensate oil reached more than 295,157,000 barrels. China had topped the Sultanate's oil exports, followed by Japan and India. Watching the Sultanate of Oman television, and still to come in our news bulletin. With the aim to encourage camel owners and breeders to maintain their connection to their lineage and heritage, the traditional camel festival held in the Wilaya of Ibri concluded. Welcome back to the news from the Sultanate of Oman television. A court in Sudan convicted former President Omar al-Bashir of money laundering and corruption today, sentencing him to 2 years in a rehabilitation facility. That's the first verdict in a series of legal proceedings against al-Bashir, who is also wanted by the International Criminal Court on charges of war crimes and genocide linked to the Darfur conflict in the year 2000s. The verdict came nearly a year after Sudanese protesters first began their revolt against al-Bashir's three-decade authoritarian rule. Al-Bashir has been in custody since April, when Sudan's military stepped in and removed him from power after months of nationwide protest. The 75-year-old was charged earlier this year with money laundering after millions of US dollars, euros and Sudanese pounds were seized in his home shortly after his ouster. Countries remain deadlocked in talks over combating the climate crisis. Discussions at the United Nations Global Conference drag on beyond the official deadline. Officials from almost 200 countries met early today to examine new text drafted overnight. Many nations and observers said the latest versions risk backtracking on existing commitments made in the 2015 Paris Climate Accord and didn't reflect the urgent warnings from the scientists that greenhouse gas emissions need to fall sharply and soon. Chile's Environment Minister Carolina Scomet, who is chairing the 2-week talks in Madrid, urged countries to recognize the overall balance of the latest drafts and called on officials to show the outside world that they deliver, that multilateralism works. A director at the World Resources Institute fears a weak outcome of the summit that should set off alarm bells around the world. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson visited Northern England today to meet newly elected Conservative Party's lawmakers in the working-class heartland that turned its back on the opposition Labour Party in this week's election and helped give him an 80-seat majority. Armed with his hefty new majority, Johnson is set to start the process next week of pushing Brexit legislation through Parliament to ensure Britain leaves the European Union by the January 2031 deadline. Once he is past that hurdle, breaking 3 years of parliamentary deadlock, he has to seal a trade deal with the bloc by the end of 2020. Johnson owes his success in part to traditional Labour voting working-class constituencies in Northern England that backed the Conservatives because of the party's promise to deliver Brexit. During the 2016 referendum, many of those communities voted to leave the European Union because of concerns that immigrants were taking their jobs and neglect by the central government in London.
The ballot paper and wavering before coming down for us and the Conservatives.
In order to follow scientific updates and acquaint workers at the health sectors with the spreading of non-communicable diseases in the Sultanate and implement effective prevention programs to contain them, the Directorate General of Health Services in the Governorate of Al Baraymi organized work sessions about monitoring and fighting non-communicable diseases in the private health sectors. The sessions discussed the concept of the work environment and occupational health in the Sultanate and their services, in addition to reviewing the aspects of proper medical waste disposal according to the Infection Control Manual and training workers in the health sector with modern techniques in hand hygiene culture. Niyabat of Al-Hamra Ad-Duru'a in the Wilaya of Ibri concluded the traditional camel festivals which took place in the fresh camel race course. The race aimed at encouraging camel owners and breeders to maintain their connection to their lineage and heritage in one hand, and encouraging them also to raise camels as a sustainable economic growth. The traditional camel festival attracted many camel race enthusiasts and hobbyists who produced their best breeds of camels to compete against each other in the race course. You're watching. The Ministry of Interior announces the enrolling of applications for the municipal council elections will open from tomorrow, Sunday. Sultanate participates in the works of the 4th World Conference of the World Tourism Organization and UNESCO in Kyoto City in Japan. And more than 1.6 billion Omani Riyals is the total volume of direct foreign investments in the Sultanate at the end of the second quarter of 2019. And with that, we do conclude this news bulletin brought to you live from this news center of the Sultanate of Oman Television. Thank you for joining us and good night.